Imagine stepping into a world of velvet corridors, golden lamps, and hushed whispers, a world where beauty was both a blessing and a death sentence. It is the year 1520, and inside the hidden walls of Topkapi Palace, hundreds of women live under rules so unusual, so merciless, that every breath they take is measured, every glance calculated. Here, love was forbidden, intimacy was weaponized, and a single mistake could erase your name from history forever. These were not the sweet myths of romance whispered in storybooks. These were iron laws designed to keep the Sultan untouchable and the women powerless. From midnight rituals to forbidden pregnancies, from bizarre purity tests to grotesque obsessions that shaped the Sultan's bedchambers. Tonight we pull back the silk curtains and reveal the unusual bedroom rules of the Ottoman Harem that history tried to keep hidden. The harem of the Ottoman Empire was never merely a place of luxury or desire. It was an institution forged out of strategy, control, and a cold manipulation of human intimacy. Behind its jeweled doors, beneath the painted ceilings and tiled walls, the lives of women were not their own. Every gesture, every moment in the Sultan's presence was dictated by laws that were at once unusual and cruel. The most haunting of these laws was also the most silent. No concubine was permitted to remain in the Sultan's chamber until dawn. However captivating her beauty, however strong the Sultan's desire, the moment sleep claimed him she was forced to slip away in darkness, her silken steps echoing through the corridors as eunuchs watched from the shadows. To defy this rule was not an act of romance, but a sentence of death, for it was designed with one purpose: to ensure that no woman could capture the Sultan's heart or whisper secrets into his ear in the intimacy of night. The empire could not risk pillow talk steering politics. This rule was not a mere precaution, it was the very foundation of how power was preserved within Topkapi. To allow a woman the comfort of the dawn meant allowing her the privilege of companionship, the chance to weave emotions into the Sultan's mind. The architects of imperial control understood that influence is born not only in council chambers and military tents, but in the silence of bedrooms, where confessions and desires escape unchecked. And so, by law, the Sultan awoke each morning alone, detached from the women who shared his nights. Guards ensured compliance, and if a concubine was found lingering when daylight pierced the lattice windows, her life was swiftly ended. Intimacy became a ritual stripped of warmth, a theater performance where the curtain closed before sunrise. Yet even the most rigid rules can be broken, and it was in the early 16th century that one woman altered the course of harem history. She was known to the world as Hürrem Sultan, a young captive of Ukrainian origin, brought into the palace as so many others had been before her. Unlike those who obeyed without question, she dared to defy the unspoken order. On a night when her fate should have been sealed, she refused to rise when the Sultan slept. She remained until morning, lying in chambers reserved only for fleeting shadows, and when the dawn light crept into the room, she was still there. By all logic of the harem, she should have been dragged away and executed. Her defiance made an example. Instead, Sultan Suleiman did not punish her. He embraced her presence, and with that single act, centuries of protocol began to crumble. The shock that rippled through the harem after this night was volcanic. Senior women who had endured decades under the midnight rule recoiled in horror. Their loyalty, their silent obedience, had meant nothing in the face of this young woman's audacity. The valid Sultan, the mother who ruled over the harem with iron authority, saw her own power challenged by someone who turned defiance into ascendancy. The hierarchy trembled as whispers of rebellion echoed through perfumed chambers. Some concubines demanded her death, others dared to wonder if the rule itself had been undone. But Hürrem's boldness did more than win the Sultan's favor. It redefined what influence within the harem could mean. By claiming the dawn, she claimed a place in history, becoming not just a concubine but an empress, shaping policies, forging alliances, and rewriting the balance of power within the Ottoman court. What this rule reveals is not simply cruelty, but the meticulous calculation of an empire that transformed even the most private act into an extension of governance. For the harem was not a sanctuary of passion, it was a battlefield where affection was rationed, where love was equated with treason, and where survival meant obedience to laws that denied women the right to dream of connection. In the Ottoman harem, the dawn was not the beginning of hope, It was the moment that reminded every woman she was nothing more than a shadow passing through the sultan's bed. If the first rule tore away intimacy by forbidding the dawn, the second law of the harem turned motherhood itself into a strange bargain between power and loss. It was known as the rule of one concubine, one son, and it bound every woman in the sultan's service with invisible chains more binding than iron. The moment a concubine bore a male child, the sultan would never again share his bed with her. What should have been the ultimate triumph, producing an heir to the throne, became simultaneously the death of her romantic bond, a final curtain falling over whatever tenderness might once have existed between them. From the instant she delivered a son, her life was transformed. She was moved away from the sultan's private chambers, given apartments farther across the sprawling harem, and though her political status grew, her nights of closeness were permanently finished. The empire dictated that a mother's new identity was not lover, not companion, but guardian of a prince whose future carried the weight of succession. This arrangement created a cruel paradox for the women who lived under its rule. To conceive a son was to secure safety, wealth, and influence. A mother of a prince was granted elaborate quarters decorated with the finest tiles, golden lamps, and silk-draped couches. She was given servants, resources, and respect, for she was no longer simply a concubine. She was the vessel of imperial destiny. Yet at the same time, this triumph ended her access to the sultan's chamber forever. She could wield political influence, but she could never again know the intimacy of the man whose child she carried. What the empire gave with one hand, it took away with the other, leaving women suspended between exaltation and exile. Their power grew in public, but their private world was closed off like a locked door they could never reopen. For women who bore daughters, the situation was altogether different, though no less treacherous. A daughter was no guarantee of security, for only sons held the key to influence. Those who gave birth to girls retained their place in the sultan's rotation, able to compete for his attention night after night, but they lived under constant dread. Each new pregnancy was a gamble, for if it brought forth a boy, their place in his bed and their fragile intimacy would end forever. This uncertainty bred fear that twisted even joy into anxiety, and palace records reveal that women resorted to desperate measures to control their fate. They drank herbal concoctions, followed timing rituals, and relied on whispered remedies to delay or prevent pregnancies, turning their very bodies into battlegrounds where survival depended on resisting the natural rhythms of life. The cruelty of this rule was not accidental but deliberate, for it ensured that no single woman could monopolize the sultan's affection. By severing intimacy after a son's birth, the harem kept jealousy contained and balanced the ambitions of rival concubines. Each woman became locked in a cycle where motherhood was both salvation and sacrifice. It was a system designed to fracture unity, ensuring that no bond of love could ever threaten the empire's absolute control. Even within gilded walls, where luxury appeared limitless, every choice a concubine made was shadowed by dread. Should she hope for a son and lose the sultan's touch forever, or should she cling to intimacy while knowing her position could collapse with a single pregnancy? The harem's laws turned life's most sacred bond between mother, father, and child into a cold transaction of power. The cries of newborn princes echoed through chambers that smelled of rosewater and incense, but they were cries that signaled both triumph and farewell. For the women of the harem, there was no gentle balance between love and power, only the constant awareness that intimacy could be stripped away at the very moment it was most meaningful. It was this paradox, one concubine, one son, that revealed the empire's genius for turning natural human emotions into levers of politics, ensuring that no woman could ever truly claim both love and authority at once. If the rules of intimacy and motherhood defined the emotional and political boundaries of the harem, the process by which women were chosen to even enter the sultan's chambers exposed another chilling layer of control. Before any concubine could be permitted to share a night with the ruler, she was subjected to examinations that stripped away dignity under the guise of purity tests. These rituals, conducted by palace midwives and senior matrons, were far more invasive than anything resembling ordinary medical practice. They did not simply confirm virginity or physical health. They evaluated every detail of a woman's body and behavior with the cold precision of administrators measuring livestock. Records describe how candidates were judged for their symmetry, their breathing patterns during sleep, the rhythm of their heartbeat, and even the possibility of snoring or talking unconsciously. Any sound that might disturb the sultan's rest was treated as unacceptable, and a woman who failed such criteria was immediately disqualified, relegated to menial duties elsewhere in the palace. The harem reduced women not to companions or individuals, but to carefully measured instruments of imperial satisfaction. The psychological effect of these examinations was devastating. Women arrived at the palace from distant lands, captives, tributes, or gifts from foreign dignitaries, and were stripped of the last fragments of their former identity. Their worth was not in their thoughts, their talents, or even their beauty, but in whether their bodies aligned with a ruler's standards that could shift with the tides of his obsessions. Nowhere was this more grotesquely visible than during the reign of Sultan Ibrahim, remembered with horror for the bizarre desires that reshaped the very architecture of his harem. His fixation began with an animal's anatomy he had encountered during a hunt, an obsession so consuming that he ordered golden replicas to be crafted and sent across the empire, instructing governors and emissaries to find women who matched these measurements. Suddenly, the recruitment of concubines became a campaign that spanned provinces and villages, reducing countless women to objects against which molds were compared. Out of this grotesque process emerged a woman named Maria, an Armenian of immense size who was renamed Ivikar and elevated to prominence simply because her body reflected the Sultan's peculiar obsession. Ibrahim's reign introduced further eccentricities that blurred the line between intimacy and spectacle. Convinced that animal pelts enhanced his virility, he demanded that chambers be draped in the furs of wolves, bears, and foxes, transforming sacred spaces of privacy into bizarre menageries of dead skins. Persian carpets and silken tapestries gave way to heavy animal hides, their scent lingering in the air as part of a ritualized environment intended to amplify his pleasure. What should have been a sanctuary of human connection instead became a stage decorated with the trophies of slaughter, where women were forced to submit not only to the Sultan, but to the bizarre demands of his imagination. For the concubines trapped in this world, survival meant adapting to whims that could shift from night to night, for failure to please him was punishable not by dismissal, but by execution or exile into obscurity. The cruelty of these selection and preparation practices reveals how deeply the harem system dehumanized the women it housed. They were not free agents of desire or affection, but bodies molded to fit imperial fantasies. Even those who never entered the Sultan's chambers bore the scars of these examinations, their rejection branding them as unworthy within a hierarchy that measured women as resources rather than human beings. The very act of being chosen was not a triumph but the beginning of another form of bondage, for every law, every whim, every ritual that followed served only to remind them that their existence in the harem was never about them as individuals. It was about the empire's ability to turn human intimacy into another arm of governance, where pleasure was a tool of power, and a woman's body was a battlefield on which the empire wrote its will. Beyond the examinations and strange obsessions, the harem functioned under a system of organization that was as rigid and calculated as the machinery of an army. Intimacy with the Sultan was not a matter of spontaneity, nor was it left to his fleeting moods. Instead, it was managed with bureaucratic precision, recorded, scheduled, and archived in a manner that stripped human closeness of its natural rhythm and replaced it with an imperial timetable. The palace treasurer, a figure one might expect to balance accounts of gold and grain, also maintained exhaustive ledgers that documented the Sultan's nights as though they were transactions of state. Every encounter was noted with dates, the name of the woman involved, the duration of their stay, and in some instances even the outcome, for the harem was not simply concerned with pleasure, but with the political implications of conception and lineage. In this way, sexuality itself became part of the empire's administration, controlled and measured like taxation or military campaigns. The consequences of this scheduling system were profound. Women did not live in anticipation of passion or affection, but in the shadow of calendars that dictated when they might be called, if they were called at all. Nights were allocated weeks or even months in advance, each concubine learning her fate through symbols of silk and thread distributed by the Valid Sultan, the mother of the reigning ruler who oversaw the rotation with unchallenged authority. A handkerchief of gold thread might signal immediate favor, while a white silk cloth could mean the end of all opportunities, a silent exile from the sultan's presence. This method of communication was not merely ceremonial, it was psychological warfare, instilling in every woman a sense that her value was constantly being measured, ranked, and displayed before her peers. The harem became less a community than a contest, where women battled silently for relevance in a system that reduced love to numbers on a page. The strict enforcement of these schedules revealed the degree to which the sultan's bedroom was considered state property. To deviate from the allotted time was not seen as a personal indiscretion, but as an act of treason against the empire itself. Records describe how one woman, Gulthum Hatun, was executed for selling her scheduled night to another concubine, a transaction that might seem trivial in another context, but within the harem represented the corruption of imperial order. Her fate demonstrated the merciless consequences of disrupting the schedule, for access to the sultan was not a gift, but a duty bound by law, and any attempt to alter it was punished with the same severity as crimes of betrayal or conspiracy. In this way, the harem enforced obedience not only through fear of rejection, but through the ever-present threat of death, reminding every woman that she was not a partner in intimacy, but a participant in an institution that used her body to uphold the empire's machinery of power. Even the architecture of the sultan's private chambers reflected this culture of surveillance and control. The rooms were designed with hidden passages, angled windows, and reflective tiles that allowed eunuchs and officials to observe encounters without being seen. Privacy, in its truest sense, did not exist. What appeared as intimacy between two individuals was, in reality, a performance staged under the invisible gaze of administrators and guards, ensuring that no rule was broken, no emotion expressed beyond what the empire permitted. Concubines approached the sultan's bed through predetermined routes, guarded at every step, so that even their journey to intimacy was choreographed to emphasize submission and obedience. Once inside, they were bound by ritualistic gestures, never turning their back to the ruler, never speaking unless commanded, never betraying any sign of personal desire. The act itself was stripped of spontaneity and wrapped instead in layers of ceremony, reducing passion to protocol. What emerged from this system was a chilling portrait of control, where the very essence of human connection was dissected, timed, and logged as though it were an extension of military orders. For the women trapped inside, love was not merely absent. It was forbidden, replaced by rules that converted intimacy into an administrative ritual. Every sigh, every gesture, every moment of silence was part of a larger design intended to keep the sultan unreachable, to ensure that no concubine could transform closeness into influence, and to remind all who entered his chambers that they were not participants in love, but instruments in the empire's endless game of power. As the rotation of intimacy and the laws of motherhood dictated the rhythm of life within the harem, another equally crushing dimension emerged: the rituals of preparation and the endless pursuit of beauty that consumed every concubine's existence. For those selected to enter the sultan's chambers, the days before their scheduled night unfolded like a theater of submission, where bodies were treated as canvases for imperial desire. Women were isolated in perfumed rooms, their skins scrubbed with oils, their hair washed in scented waters, and their bodies anointed with mixtures believed to heighten arousal or fertility. These rituals were not gestures of care, but procedures of transformation, designed to erase individuality and remake each concubine into a flawless vessel of pleasure. Garments were tailored for single use, sewn in silks that could be easily slipped away, and once worn in the sultan's chamber, they were never to be used again. Clothing became relics of a single encounter, either destroyed or carefully stored, marking each woman's service as though it were evidence in a record of imperial possession. Yet behind this veil of beauty lay unimaginable cruelty. Palace archives reveal that the cosmetics used were often laced with mercury and lead, substances that produced luminous skin and pale complexions, but poisoned the body with every application. Women endured painful treatments designed to mold their figures into whatever shape was demanded by the ruler's shifting tastes, and they starved themselves on diets that left them fainting during ceremonies of intimacy. In their struggle to remain desirable, they sacrificed their health and, in many cases, their lives, for failure to meet imperial standards was a path toward obscurity or death. The rituals that promised elegance and refinement were, in truth, mechanisms of slow destruction, turning beauty into a form of bondage. The path from communal quarters to the sultan's chamber was itself a procession of symbolism. Chosen concubines were escorted by eunuchs along carefully plotted routes that ensured no rival could witness their ascent to temporary power. Every step reminded them of their fragility, for they began their walk among dozens of women living in confinement and ended it in chambers that glittered with luxury but radiated isolation. Once inside, the choreography of their movements reinforced their submission. They were forbidden to turn their backs to the sultan, forbidden to speak without command, forbidden to reveal any sign of discomfort or desire. The silence was as suffocating as the incense-filled air, creating an atmosphere where intimacy resembled ritual sacrifice rather than human connection. Even the moments that followed intimacy were regulated with the same clinical detachment. Women were removed from the chamber by eunuchs and subjected immediately to examinations designed to confirm or deny pregnancy. These inspections, carried out within hours of their encounter, emphasized once again that their value lay not in companionship, but in their capacity to produce heirs. Records of each encounter were meticulously logged, detailing not only the names and dates, but, at times, the duration and even the sultan's level of satisfaction. These notes became part of an imperial archive, transforming what should have been private into state documentation, stripping away all traces of humanity and reducing love to statistics. Perhaps the most devastating rule of all was the treatment of genuine affection as treason. A concubine who displayed love for the sultan risked immediate exile or execution, for emotion implied loyalty to something beyond the empire's control. Love was dangerous because love could inspire rebellion, love could seek permanence, love could claim equality where the empire demanded submission. And so, within the harem, bonds of sisterhood dissolved into webs of mistrust, as women were encouraged to betray one another, to report transgressions, to ensure that no unity could rise against the machinery of control. Rivalries flourished, fueled by fear, jealousy, and survival, until every relationship within the harem was poisoned by suspicion. In the end, the unusual bedroom rules of the Ottoman harem were not curiosities of a distant past, but instruments of power, crafted to bend desire into obedience and to turn intimacy into an extension of empire. For over 6 centuries, these rules silenced voices, shattered affections, and transformed countless women into shadows moving through marble corridors, their lives recorded in ledgers rather than remembered in love. The echo of their footsteps still haunts history, a reminder of how absolute power can corrupt not only politics and war, but the very essence of human connection. The marble corridors of Topkapi Palace may today stand silent, their chambers preserved as museums, and their walls decorated with tiles that shimmer under the soft light. But within those stones linger the echoes of lives lived in silence, fear, and submission. The unusual bedroom rules of the Ottoman harem were never simply about intimacy. They were tools of power, carefully crafted to sever affection, to fracture trust, and to transform the most private of human experiences into instruments of empire. For centuries, women who should have been remembered for their beauty, intelligence, and resilience were instead reduced to footnotes in ledgers, their names recorded not for who they were, but for how they served. Yet even within this system of control, figures like Hurrem Sultan emerged to challenge the laws, reminding us that defiance can echo across history just as powerfully as obedience. When we peel back the silks and shadows of the harem, what we uncover is not a tale of romance but a warning, a reminder of how easily love, intimacy, and trust can be twisted into chains when authority demands control over every human bond. These rules may belong to the past, but their lessons still speak loudly in the present. If you found this glimpse into history as haunting and fascinating as we did, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss more dark and hidden chapters of our world's past.